All right. Thanks for tuning in here today. We are excited to share some progress updates on this collaborative project we've been engaging in. I am Becky Stuntebeck, and I am a veterinarian that works with the Koret Shelter Medicine program based out of UC Davis, and I'm a member of the facility design team.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Pable. I'm the project lead for the nonprofit organization Design Resources for Homelessness. I partnered with Becky on this project, and we're excited to tell you our progress. And it is definitely a progress situation. This is not done. This is just in a state of becoming. So we're going to share some things with you which may survive to the end, or they may not. We'll tell you more about that as we go along.
Lovely. So what is this project that we've been working on? Well, in sort of spirit, this quote what nicely captured what we're trying to put together here. We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. And go ahead and jump to the next slide, Jill. I thought that was relevant here because historically we know that support services for people experiencing homelessness or at risk for experiencing homelessness have not accommodated people's pets. And so what we want to do is not only support all of those folks out in the field doing the work to accommodate the pets and the people together, but also to optimize that interaction and keeping those families whole and together. And so that is what we're trying to focus on with our project. And so we are looking to envision a best case shelter for people with animals. And we want the design of that, like I said, the design to support doing that in an optimal way, not just kind of getting by. Of course, we know the human animal bond is incredibly important, and even more so for people who are experiencing trauma and upheaval in their lives, including folks who are experiencing homelessness or at risk for that. And we know also that folks in those situations often forego services for themselves if their pets are not accommodated. So this is a really important aspect that needs to be developed in the human service sector.
So for a bit of context, we wanted to also let you know that this effort is actually in two separate reports. The first report, entitled People Experiencing Homelessness with Animals, a review of research and emerging social services response guidelines, is a partner project between My Dog is My Home, the sponsor of this conference, and also Design Resources for Homelessness. Part one is primarily a text-based explanation and justification of why we should be thinking about housing people with their support animals, with a very healthy reference list as well. And that leads into the second part, which is the subject of this presentation here. So who is working on part two? As we mentioned, Becky Stuntebeck here on this presentation, and me, myself, we're trying to bring architectural design expertise and animal and shelter expertise together. But we're also harvesting the expert advice of a series of advisors. There in human shelter. Oops, I'm sorry, this is dancing all around. Veterinary shelter medicine, veterinary standards, design guidance, and also anthropology, because this is a complex situation that involves policy, process, architecture, light, human space, animal psychology, and a whole series of things. So to give this the best balance, we figured we needed to bring in multiple experts to that.
Yes, and Jill just used the word complex. And I think this slide also reminds us how there's these layers of complexity here. So in envisioning who we want to be accommodated by these spaces, we are trying to include a wide spectrum of folks. So we want clients who are in a situation of needing that emergency sheltering with their pets to have access. So these folks may have their animals with them. There may be folks arriving who don't have animals with them. There's adults who are going to have a wide range of different identities that are going to affect how they move through the world. we are expecting to see folks who are potentially in a romantic relationship, single adults, families. And then we also want to not accommodate, but ensure that the staff, the personnel, donors, and other visitors or legislators who are interacting with the space are also able to do so in ways that optimize the services that are being offered in that space. Next slide. Oh. So capacity is a big question. How many people is the space going to be able to house? And in addition to that, how many animals is the space going to be able to house? And there's a lot of uncertainty around just what the demand would be in any given point in time in any given community. We know there's a need, and there is some research out there that suggests that between 5 and 25% of folks experiencing homelessness have pets. But what kinds of pets? It varies a lot, and how many pets, etc. So our vision for this particular facility is that we're hoping to accommodate 75 human clients, and that, like I mentioned, will include families, single adults, and adults with other unique requirements. And then we're also envisioning being able to support folks who have companion animals. We think that the majority of those pets will be dogs, but to some extent, cats are going to be in the mix, and it may change from moment to moment too, what the demand is for cat housing versus dog housing. And then some number that isn't very big, we want to be able to support folks who are traveling with other animal species as well, to the extent that that's reasonable and humane for everyone.
So among the many principles and assumptions that are guiding our decisions that are informed also by advice from our experts and so forth are the principles of trauma-informed design. There are many writings on trauma-informed design. The particular framework that we're going on is one that had stemmed from some research on what's called ontological security, which is that feeling of, being at peace, being calm, being in a home environment where you can relax and so forth. And through research from me and from others, we've kind of boiled that down to 6 main fundamental human needs: dignity and self-esteem, empowerment and personal control, security, privacy, and maintaining personal space, the ability to manage stress, the ability to have a sense of community, and also being in the presence of beauty and meaning, which also means being able to be in the presence of a visually ordered space. So these are things that are high on our priority list, and along with the many needs of animals as well, which I rather imagine actually would appreciate these kinds of things as well, which is an interesting idea as well. So these are some of our most fundamental principles. We're also looking at a number of other goals based on a literature review that we have undertaken. First and foremost, we're seeing this hypothetical space as one that provides sanctuary, a place that is a refuge from the turmoil of the street. And it does that in a number of ways. First of all, managing sensory input. And I will be honest, I've learned a lot about this from Becky regarding sensory input for animals as well, be they visual, acoustic, smell, proprioception, which is the sense of being in a space and yourself being in that volume of space, creating a predictable and comprehensive environment through procedures. So it's not just architecture, physical architecture. The architecture actually has to accommodate processes and procedures. So while that is not an absolute priority for us, at times we have to identify procedures that would be supported by the architecture. Another idea is simply avoiding the scary, things that would trigger, things that would be something that, at a very subconscious gut level, you would not want to be around, whether that's visual, whether that's sound, etc. Providing choice where possible, a fundamental idea within trauma-informed design, and also fostering connections, not only human to human, but human to animal, managing trauma, especially re-traumatization, by trying to anticipate triggers. And then lastly, and certainly not least, providing the opportunity for delight, which certainly bolsters somebody's self-esteem and dignity and helps them to manage stress a little bit better.
So one of the core principles of co-sheltering in our project is that we want people, families, human families to be able to be with their pets as much as possible, like close physical contact. And sort of intuitively, we understand and recognize the emotional and psychological benefits that come with that to the people and their pets. But there's also other benefits that can come along with that as the family members are put in the position where they can provide the routine daily care and handling of their own pets. You're far less likely to see animal bites or scratches. You're less likely to see disease transmission, and that includes both animal to animal diseases, but also potentially zoonotic diseases from animals to people. And I included this plus or minus, it may be easier for service provider personnel in the sense that, again, the family is supported in being the primary caretakers of their own pets, that takes that responsibility off of the service provider. But there's also complexity, as we've already noted, that comes with animals and people existing in a communal space together in a way that supports all of those needs that Jill just shared, and keeps everybody feeling reasonably good. And the other caveat here is that our design does incorporate other housing options so that we have flexibility depending on the needs of the population at any given time, individual animals who perhaps aren't coping well in a particular circumstance. So we want that flexibility so that we can continue to be able to support a wide range of families and their pets.
We wanted to also offer the caveat that we recognize that physical place, i.e. architecture, is really not the whole story here. It is imperative that the architecture actually supports the policies and procedures, and that's no small thing. For example, vetting practices and policies as to who is, a client at this space. Certainly, there will be liability issues, not only people to people, but also people to animals that will necessitate legal sorts of constructs, such as release forms and so forth. And architecture simply is not in a position to kind of branch out on its own and, be the be all end all. It has to actually support the philosophy, the mission, the values, and the priorities of any given shelter organization. So in that way, our hypothetical project here is meant to kind of bend itself to various specific instances. So we're not in a position to actually spell all of that out, as you might imagine.
Okay, so we have also, in putting together our designs, assumed that certain services will be available on site at the co-sheltering location, either intermittently or potentially constantly. And so those services that we're imagining being available include veterinary services for the clients who are residing there with their pets, potentially also folks out in the community who are not residents. And I can talk a little bit more about where that might come into play when we get to the animal care area. We want to accommodate educational services, social services, and health services as well.
So with all that said, we wanted to share some aspects, some emerging aspects of the design. Once again, this is not all done completely. In fact, you'll see as we talk about these various drawings, they're in various states of polish. But we did want to give you a sense of what was coming and what we were thinking. And we certainly welcome your thoughts on this by reaching out to either of us about this as we continue to work on it through this next year. So the first thing we do is we started with what looks like a very abstract sketch here, which is what is called a bubble diagram. This is a plan view, high level look at both the site and the interior building, showing functions, showing how it relates to parking, how it relates various zones to each other. So where we've landed for right now is a situation that sort of has a bit of a circular feeling to it, centering around what we're calling a living room, where we would come in through a reception area here called greeting. To the right would be an entire animal suite of veterinary services, wards for the various animals, animal outside area. To the left would be support counseling spaces. The green things you see at the top would be administration spaces, restrooms, maintenance, those kinds of things. The beige things you see up at the upper right would be certain services, such as health services as a clinic, social services for counseling, education spaces, and some quiet rooms and so forth. The blue and purple that you see on the right would be the sleeping quarters. And you can see this is broken out into a great number of subcategories, such as men, also families, also women, and also flex spaces for people with special needs that would need to be sequestered from the other groups, with a special consideration of separating, especially men, from the women and family for security purposes as necessary. At the bottom, you see dining and kitchen. So this is kind of surrounding the living room with all of these spaces. And then below, the red area would be for children, with children's outdoor play areas and outdoor dining. And all of that would be looking out into an open, undeveloped space with some wandering trails that would probably be both helpful to people and as well as their animals. We are already starting to make some changes to this, which have not been made in this particular bubble diagram, but this is some of the central organization of things. I'll first take you to reception, and what you see here is a somewhat polished but still loose reception floor plan. There's a number of things to look at here. The two yellow arrows denote that there's actually two arrival paths, one for people without animals, figuring that some people will be fearful of animals or may have allergies, and then one path for people with animals. This whole space can be subdivided with a retractable gate if there's concerns over mixing the two groups at any one point. And you'll see that both pass through a weather trap and then go up to a rather developed reception desk with some things that they encountered before that, before making their way back to the baggage check and then through to the controlled spaces through a metal detector if necessary, passing by baggage check-in and package desks. You'll see some interesting kind of new spaces on the right where it says waiting pods. One thing we've decided to include are sort of transient half-wall pods where people with animals or children, for example, could wait in a way that they're not worried about interacting with other people if they have to wait for service or they just needed a moment to collect themselves. To the right would go the animal intake suite where the veterinarians are located and so forth. And to the left would be counseling. Another look at this is kind of sort of a three-dimensional view. This is looking into that big space from the front right corner. And so you'll see this is meant to be a pretty active, busy space because it has a lot of floor plan square footage. There's going to be people passing back and forth a lot. So we really gave this some wiggle room for people passing by with animals, with children, because there's so many different population groups passing through here, as well as staff. At the right, you can see the waiting pods I had mentioned with people and animals that are in a transient status using that room. The bottom, you see waiting spaces, and the right on the bottom, you see a counseling space that's very available to that front area. If we look more closely at the intake process, you'll see a couple of other features. The first thing people would encounter when they come in is actually a space where they might get a cold drink of water that they dispense themselves with nearby trash, and animals can have a drink as well while they're waiting in the queue line. We also tried to front load key policies, which is what that text is you see in the middle before they reach the reception desk. Another feature we're trying to include is thinking about this play by play in terms of where people are standing and what they're doing and how they're managing their luggage, their animals, their children, and so forth. So you'll see things such as leash tie-ins. You'll see shelves for propping of book bags. And then you'll see on the right a privacy panel that lets somebody who needs to have a private conversation be able to step away acoustically from others waiting at the reception desk. And then at the right, you'll see a place for luggage to be either searched or taken for insect eradication and so forth, and where packages and mail might be dispensed. So we've tried to think very strategically about the whole process of checking in and having those conversations. Here's a couple more of the features. Here's a picture of that waiting pod, as I had mentioned. This is just a place that has a little bit more visual sequestration to avoid pets being stressed. And then on the right, these leash sort of hold downs that let somebody control their animal for a moment if that's helpful to them as they do paperwork, for example. Next, we move into the animal care suite, which was to the right of reception.
Yes, thank you, Jill. And this one, there's a lot going on in this one image. So stick with us. But up in the upper left of this image, you'll see those waiting pods that Jill was just describing. And hopefully then you can appreciate how those allow folks to potentially move right into the reception area of the clinic space that is accommodated here. There's also another way in that is separate from these waiting pods. So some of the bigger themes before I keep diving into some of these details is pathways, species separation, keeping cats and other small critters far away from dogs who are noisy and whatnot, as often as possible, minimizing how much they're crossing paths, making pathways for people with animals efficient so that they aren't having to cross areas that are very busy with a lot of hubbub and stimulating for animals. We also want this animal care suite to be able to both support people coming in from the waiting area, as well as people who are already residing in the facility, but may need to enter the space to provide care for their pets who may be spending time in the accommodations that are here. And then lots of supplies and storage for daily animal care, pet food, grooming supplies, animal laundry, and so on. So more specifically, at the center of this diagram is the main hub of the veterinary clinic space. And this space will accommodate preventative care, provision, medical care of illness, and small volume surgery. And as you'll see, it's centrally located so that it's not in the way of folks needing to get from point A to point B, residents who are going to take care of their pets and whatnot. And to take this back a little bit earlier to what I was saying about the consideration for providing services to people who aren't residents, people out in the community, the design comes into play there because we want to think about how often is the veterinary team, the people, how often are they actually utilizing these spaces? If we're thinking about people always being in these spaces 5 days a week, typical work week hours, then we need the space to be able to accommodate people being there constantly and potentially multiple services being provided at different times, with an animal in an exam room while another animal's in the clinic space getting a procedure done or something. Versus if we're focused on accommodating the needs of resident pets, then maybe our veterinary personnel presence is a lot more intermittent. And so the dynamics and the design shift a little bit according to that. This design, I think, will accommodate both of those, but nothing high volume. So it's not set up sort of for efficiency or volume of sales, if you will, without necessarily there being money exchanged, but like the amount of services that could pass through would be limited by what we have here. Okay, so moving on, we have, like I said, separation of dogs and all the other animals. So dog areas where dogs would be spending time is at the bottom of the picture. And you'll note that, and so they're far away, as far away from the areas where the cats and other animals are spending time. The kennels that we have are double compartment, front to back, indoor, outdoor, with a guillotine door in between, and that supports efficiency. If the animal goes to the bathroom on one side, you can close that guillotine, clean up, reopen it, and whatnot. They don't need to be right next to their mess. There's also a central courtyard that connects these two dog areas, and neither dog area is terribly large, because sometimes you will get a dog who's spending a lot of time barking. And so that way you limit how many animals are going to be in that space at any time. The dog area is meant to be a day use area primarily. So Jill will be talking about the sleeping pods in a few minutes here. And the dogs in particular are more likely to be able to successfully remain in those pods while minimizing their stress. And so the kennels here are primarily if a dog needs a break from that space for some reason, or the owners need to go off site for a few hours to work or something like that, the dog can spend time safely in here and be comfortable for a stretch of several hours, but then return back to being close to their person or people when that can be accommodated. The cat wards are up at the top of the screen. There are two of them. And right next door is a small animal ward. The small animal ward is left sort of very open and flexible. We're imagining animals coming with their own enclosures that are very specialized to their unique needs. So maybe there'll be some counter space and storage space for supplies, but not a lot of fixed housing units there. The cat housing would have cage banks on wheels. They could be moved around within those rooms or between those rooms as needed by the population. Also double compartment with the pass through there so that cats have plenty of space when they're spending time in there. And potentially the ability to have timeshares where a cat could have a break from its cage with the owner in the room playing with them. Maybe there's cat trees or something like that, so they can get some exercise safely confined in that room. Cats, while we have built in the ability to keep them with their people in the sleeping pods, as you'll see in a moment here, cats can be a little less accommodating of situations like that, where you're in a big room with a lot of things going on around you. And so for those cats who need a quieter space that's out of traffic and whatnot, these would serve as primary housing areas. We did add little windows though at the very top though, so that potentially could be enriching for cats and or people to watch the cats in the cat rooms. Let's see. I think those were the big highlights that I wanted to cover, except that I'll also point out on the far right of the picture, we've got our sort of animal kitchen-y area and animal laundry area, again, so that we can ensure that residents are enabled to provide the daily care that their pets need. Okay.
All right, so we'll move on to the sleeping spaces. And again, this is usually for both people with their animals. And this is not yet really decided yet, but we did want to give you some previews of things we're thinking about. Because people come to this space with various issues, some will want to be around people, some will not. You'll see a variety of different types here. This particular space would probably be best suited for families, as you might imagine, with animals. This is not particularly great for adults with special needs. You would have an occupancy of 4 here, and this is obviously a space that would need to be in a tall ceilinged environment. This would be a good space for building community, and you can see the contained space on the left for the animal that I think would be back from the main traffic path to keep them a little bit more calm. Another variation of this would be partial height pods, if you will. We're finding that persons who have experienced violence, for example, actually like to be around other people that they know have experienced that too, for a sense of community. And they actually prefer not to have full height apartments. So these would be 60-inch tall pod sorts of panels, if you will. But here you can see an occupancy of one with also a dog. So you can see here from two different angles a pass through for the animal for a little bit more space, but also a gate from the front so that they could roam throughout the pod when their person was there and still have a measure of security there. So you can see a wardrobe and also under bed storage for the person's need, as well as these open shelves on the right, a chance for artwork and a chance for hanging backpacks and so forth for a bit of visual order. Another variation on this in a smaller configuration would be a single pod here with a crate for a dog with a little bit tighter configuration, storage and so forth, but still the gate. There's a number of variations on this. This would be a pod for occupancy of two. And you can see the storage underneath the beds and a wardrobe that's partially shown there. But the corner back there is actually intended for a cattery, a tall unit for multi-leveled cat sort of accommodation. That would be for other species, of course, than dogs, and would seem to be more appropriate for cats and their needs. And then lastly, we're playing with pods that would be meant for larger groups, such as families. This one, for example, accommodates 6 in various heights of beds with storage, and also 3 dogs, for example, that are tucked either beside or underneath the beds. And you can see up at the right some components we're playing with that would let these be reconfigured to a degree in order to accommodate the population on one given day. So again, just a kind of a taste at various levels of development of some sleeping pods that we're thinking about. We're also probably going to be adding full height apartments to this for that option as well. So as we wrap this up, we want to thank you for your attention to this. And we're excited about a dialogue that might arise from this. We're looking forward to bringing the full picture of this to you when the time comes. And we welcome your thoughts on this. So thank you very much. Becky, anything to add?
No, thank you so much for tuning in. And I'll just repeat what Jill just shared. We are very interested to hear from anyone who has other thoughts and ideas to contribute to this.
So thank you and enjoy the conference. Bye-bye.